I'm Bartholomew Schechter. My friends call me Barry. I'm a Starfleet commander. I'm a rabbi, and for the last 17 years, I've been a Starfleet chaplain. I'm currently stationed here on Starbase 3 at Alpha Centauri, so fairly close to home. I'm just over 2 years into a 3-year assignment as the senior chaplain here at Starbase 3. Before here, I served on several starships, the Avicenna, the Terre Haute, the Damphino. I was stationed at the Federation Embassy on Melmac 2. I took a year away from the chaplain corps to teach a religious studies course at the Starfleet Academy satellite campus orbiting Crepuscula 6. When this tour is over, I'll move on somewhere else, wherever Starfleet decides I can be most useful. One of my primary duties as senior chaplain is to hold regular religious services for anyone who wants to attend. The frequency varies depending on the needs of the community in a given place. Here on Starbase 3, I do 2 a week, Friday evening and Sunday morning. My personal background and initial clerical training is in the Jewish faith, but the services are multifaith in nature. That's why I keep my ministerial dress very simple, just my ordinary Starfleet uniform, a kippah to honor my Jewish faith, and a Catholic clerical stole, which a time-traveling friend of mine got autographed by the actual St. Peter. It's a pretty neat little souvenir that affords me a certain gravitas. For this morning's scripture reading, I've chosen a passage from the account of Charnamengus the Greater, which is one of the holy texts of the religion of the Vishpi people of the planet Brack. Thank you, crewman Wiktuksik, for the recommendation. I found the verses describing the flaying of the 1,000 crying serpents to be particularly vivid. The reading I've chosen is from another section, the one describing the humility Charnamengus felt when he realized the man sitting next to him on the bus, whom he'd just been berating, was in fact the almighty creator of the cosmos. It's a passage I'm sure we'll all be able to relate to. "I'm so sorry," cried Charnamengus. "If I'd known who you were, I'd never have said that about your teeth." The question I'm asked most often by people outside of Starfleet when they find out I'm a chaplain is, "Starfleet has chaplains?" I'm not insulted. Honestly, I never really thought about it myself until I was at the academy. For most people, especially on Earth, religion isn't an important part of their lives. And that's fine. Belief in a higher power is an option. It's there if the individual needs it, and they should be free to discover and explore that for themselves, rather than having one specific variation of it forced on them. Of course, it took heaps of dead bodies piled up by centuries of holy wars and institutionalized abuse before we humans figured that out, but what are you going to do? Most Starfleet facilities have spaces designated as all-faith sanctuaries, what used to be called chapels. Currently, the regular religious services aren't very well attended, to be frank. In my experience, most people only come to the chapel during times of immediate crisis, when they feel like the end might be near. So when I was assigned to starships, the chapel was always pretty busy. Here, very different situation. Not that I'm complaining. Some in the chapel corps struggle with the amount of free time you have. That's why it's so important to cultivate hobbies, to occupy your mind and body. I write old-fashioned interactive text adventure games about a rabbi named Larry who travels from planet to planet solving crimes. I'm also in a board game league here at Starbase 3. We're currently playing a game of Monopoly that's been going for about 8 months. In the context of my official duties, I don't see much of the human personnel, since these days most humans are non-religious, or at least non-practicing. The non-human crew members usually have their own ways of practicing their faiths that don't include me. Even so, being part of the Chaplain Corps in Starfleet has given me the opportunity to learn about a great many of those religions. For example, there's an ancient faith still practiced by some Andorians, which teaches that God has a third antenna, but not on his head. The Yindixians believe their chief deity is destined to someday lead an interplanetary crusade against an all-powerful crab god named Jimmy. The most widely observed religion among the Burgalids holds that our universe exists on the film of a snot bubble being blown out of God's nose. The sacred text of the Nuzgalands is a takeout menu, which is the only surviving document from a lost civilization that once ruled their planet, from which they have derived all their ecclesiastical traditions, along with recipes for several entrees which I've not yet sampled myself, but sound delicious. So there's a great deal of religious diversity in Starfleet. That includes my fellow humans. Religion isn't nearly as common among humans as it used to be, and there are many reasons for that. Many of the questions that once caused people to turn to religion have now been answered by science. Many of the social functions once provided by religion are now available through secular forms of community, which I think is wonderful. There are more specific contributing factors as well. Jesus came back in 2072, and it wound up not being that big of a deal after all. In the mid-2100s, it turned out that 4 consecutive popes were just the same El-Orion guy in a series of disguises. And, of course, many of the gods humans used to worship have turned out to be aliens. The Greek pantheon, Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, Roger Federer. Despite all that, humanity still includes people of many faiths: Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jedi. The most popular religion on Mars is Mormonism. The most popular religion on Venus is Scientology, or used to be, God rest. We tried to tell them it doesn't matter how high your operating thetan level is, you still need oxygen. The most popular religion on Mercury is Judaism. Naturally, that's where the New Israel colony is located. Of course, they gave us the hottest, most inhospitable spot in the solar system. On the bright side, at least there weren't people already living there this time. Recently, I returned to Earth, to Medina, and attended a speech by the Caliph of the Pan-Islamic Commonwealth. Afterward, I was fortunate enough to meet and briefly speak with the Caliph, a lovely woman, and I asked her, what relevance can our provincial terrestrial faiths possibly have in this day and age when the average person has witnessed greater wonders than any of the ancient prophets? She thought for a moment, then shrugged her shoulders and said, "Shit, I don't know." The chapel services are the most visible part of my job. In addition to the regularly scheduled meetings, I'm also sometimes called upon to perform other ceremonies where a spiritual leader is required. That's where the religious pluralism of Starfleet really becomes fun for me personally. Of course, I enjoy officiating a traditional Jewish wedding on the rare occasions when I'm given that opportunity, but one of the most joyous days of my life was presiding over the marriage of the first officer of the Terre Haute to the crown princess of Majigolva 12. We held it on the ship because, of course, this was after the destruction of Majigolva 12 by the Thanatoxian Imperium. The Crown Princess was one of the handful of survivors our landing party was able to beam to the ship before the planet was pulverized by the Thanatoxians' apocalypse engine, and over the next 9 months or so, she and our first officer fell in love. It was an unlikely romance. Our first officer was human, and there are some seemingly insurmountable anatomical incompatibilities between our species, but you can deal with those as long as you've got love and a little imagination and the proper adapters. Anyway, they wanted an authentic Marjagolvan marriage ceremony, and I did my very best to accommodate them. We redecorated the office's mess into a fair approximation of a Marjagolvan matrimony temple. We didn't have any conjugal purity scrubbers, needless to say, but we borrowed some curling brooms from a Canadian crew member, and they worked just fine. Our first officer looked stunning in her jewel-studded metal trikini, as did the Crown Princess, as did I. It was just a beautiful day for everyone involved. I've also experienced the opposite of that. Once, while serving as the chaplain at Clenova Station near the South Pole of Michelson 4, I had to perform the funeral rite for a crewman who was killed in an avalanche. The crewman was Talgonquan, and part of the Talgonquan funeral rite requires the officiant to urinate on the deceased. Wouldn't have been my first choice, but if we are to embrace pluralism, we must be willing to leave our comfort zone when called upon to do so. Therefore, in the spirit of honoring the culture of this dear departed comrade, I prepared, with the greatest respect, to do what the ritual required of me, and I was humiliated. There I was, standing in front of my colleagues, my friends, on this most solemn of occasions, exposed and completely dry. I don't know if it was nerves or if I should have had a glass of water beforehand, but I could not summon a single drop. The most mortifying experience of my life. Sometimes I still get unexpected flashes of memory about it that send chills down my arm. That young man deserved better than what I gave him that day. However, over and above even those sacred responsibilities, I feel that my most important duty is as counselor and spiritual advisor to my fellow members of Starfleet. Not everyone asks for spiritual counseling in that time of crisis, but if and when they do, I am always available. Except Thursdays from 1900 to 2200. That's when my movie club meets. Even that I can miss if I have to, but it's got to be an urgent situation. Speaking of which, we're meeting tomorrow night. You should come. We're watching Kingdom of the Spiders. Returning to the subject, sometimes the gravitas people attribute to you as a member of the chaplaincy, whether you deserve it or not, can be an asset in one-on-one counseling, particularly if the person being counseled needs to hear some unwelcome truths. I once met with a Starfleet admiral who was facing a court-martial after being appointed provisional governor of a Federation colony that had just been liberated from the Pringelians. The admiral was being brought up on charges for ordering the bombing of nearby indigenous settlements, which he had determined to be a threat to the security of the colony. He struggled with the arrest, the charges. He didn't think it was fair to him. He referenced other people who have been brought to trial for similar charges and said, "They're implying I'm the equivalent of Kozar the Desolator or those Vulcans who were doing terrorism a while back. It's outrageous. I'm nothing like them." But I knew that he, like myself, was a person of faith, and I told him part of being right with God is being right with your fellow people. And that means respecting the rights of others and submitting to the rule of law in a just society, which I'd like to think we have for the most part. And I said to him, "Look, you were trusted with a position of authority. You abused that authority. You've been accused of war crimes, and now you've got to take responsibility for that." It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it's what he needed to hear. As Starfleet's appointed governor, he was basically this colony's head of state. We can't have heads of state just running around committing atrocities with no accountability. Can you imagine anything so ridiculous? The great teacher, philosopher, statesman, and best-selling author Dr. Macias VIII once said, "Jupiter is the Jupiter of Jupiters." Scholars have debated the meaning of this statement for generations without reaching a consensus. What is the intended message? What is Dr. Macias VIII trying to say? Given the fact that he made this statement in his last days, when his cognitive processes were about to fail, it's entirely possible that he wasn't trying to say anything, but was merely spouting gibberish generated by his rapidly deteriorating circuits. However, and perhaps this is an article of faith, I choose not to believe that. I choose to look for the meaning. And when I look for that meaning, what I find is this: each of us, as an individual, is our own prime example. We are the epitomes of ourselves. Jupiter is the Jupiter of Jupiters, and you are the you of yous. Wise words from a wise automaton, who was also a fabulous entertainer. If you've never seen the recording of his performance at the Montreal Comedy Festival during the post-atomic horror, do yourself a favor and look it up when you get a chance. That concludes the service. Go in peace. Oh, before you go, A quick reminder to those of you in the movie club, remember this week we're meeting in the officers' lounge on level 2 because the JAG Corps is using the auditorium to screen another movie, A Few Good Men. You're going to like Kingdom of the Spiders better, believe me. Ever since my conversation in Medina with the Caliph, I've been reflecting on her answer to my question. What relevance can our faiths have in the modern world? Shit, I don't know. I regard that as a rather profound statement coming from a spiritual leader of her stature. I admire her candor. But the thing is, I was actually hoping for an answer. Because despite all the wonderful parts of my job I've been telling you about, not including the funereal urination stage fright debacle, I do struggle with the question of relevance. Can I offer something from the religious perspective that a secular counselor, or scientist, or philosopher, or leader can't? The more I struggle, the more strongly I suspect that shit I don't know is the answer. Socrates said, I know that I do not know. Perhaps that's my role, to find people when they're in that place of not knowing and sit down next to them and say, shit, I don't know either. Where did we come from? Where did the universe come from? What's our place in it? What does it all mean? Can science and secular philosophy answer these questions? Yes, and they mostly have, but if for some reason you want a second opinion,